In late June, the mood inside Clarence House felt like a slow, suffocating fog had rolled in from the Thames. The usual chatter of aides and clinking of teacups had been replaced by a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. King Charles III, the man who had waved from the Buckingham Palace balcony just days earlier during the Trooping the Colour, was now nowhere to be seen. Out in public, people wondered aloud why their monarch had vanished from all official appearances. Inside, the truth was guarded like a crown jewel. He had slipped into a deep coma after complications from his cancer treatment. The decision was made at the highest level. No statements, no photographs, no hints to the press. The palace believed secrecy would prevent panic. But not everyone saw this as a time for quiet hope. For Queen Consort Camilla, the king's incapacitation wasn't just a tragedy, it was a moment to cement her place in the royal hierarchy. While doctors worked around the clock in a private intensive care suite, Camilla summoned her most trusted aides to Sandringham House. Officially, it was framed as a rehearsal for Operation Menai Bridge, the code name for the king's funeral arrangement. In reality, it was her first move in taking the spotlight for herself. The grand meeting room at Sandringham was set for business, portraits of past monarchs looming above as if judging the living. Camilla entered in a fitted black dress, hair immaculate, her expression carefully composed. She walked to the head of the table, her husband's seat, and claimed it without hesitation. Those gathered included Prince William, Princess Anne, and a handful of advisors. William's knuckles whitened as he gripped the table's edge. He'd grown up with this room, listening to his father speak of duty among its echoes. Now, it felt like enemy territory. An advisor began to outline the funeral plan, speaking of processions, ceremonial routes, and the first speech to be given by the heir. Camilla interrupted sharply. She didn't want a long-winded relic of the past. The memorial should be short, modern, and led by her. She would deliver the speech, she insisted, because she had been at Charles's side through illness. The words hit Anne like a slap. "You are his wife, Camilla, not the heir," she shot back, her voice low but dangerous. "The right to speak for a king belongs to his blood, not to ambition." William stayed silent, but his jaw tightened. Camilla's cool smile didn't waver. That night, William returned to Kensington Palace restless and unable to sleep. His father's absence gnawed at him. Catherine tried to steady him, reminding him they had to be patient, but in another wing of Clarence House, Camilla was already staging her next move. The following morning, she transformed a quiet corner of the palace into a makeshift film studio. LED lights cast an artificial glow over a backdrop featuring the Union Jack. She dressed in mourning black, her face powdered to suggest grief without weakness. The script in her hands was a eulogy, not for when the time came, but for right now, while Charles was still alive. The recording began. Camilla's voice was solemn as she spoke of a king who shaped our national pride, and a husband whose passing leaves an unfillable void. Midway, she stopped, smirked at the cameraman, and ordered changes. She wanted her leadership role emphasized, her image sharpened for history. By noon, the unedited footage was saved to the palace communications team's computer, ready to be unleashed if the king's condition worsened. Outside his room, the beeping of medical machines carried on steadily. Inside hers, Camilla's mind was already arranging the throne room in her image. The corridors of Clarence House were dim that morning, sunlight spilling in only through narrow slits between heavy curtains. Catherine, Princess of Wales, walked quietly toward the royal library, her heels tapping against polished wood. She'd come to borrow one of King Charles's favorite books, something she could read aloud by his bedside. The king lay in the intensive care room, his breathing steady but shallow, sustained by machines and the vigilance of doctors. The library smelled of oak and dust, a comforting mix that reminded her of autumn evenings. As she scanned the rows, her hand brushed over the worn spine of an old Robert Harris novel. When she pulled it free, a folded sheet of yellowed paper slipped to the floor. She bent to pick it up, curiosity rising with each glance at the familiar looping handwriting. It was a letter from Charles. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were unmistakable. If the time came for his funeral, the responsibility of speaking and overseeing it would fall to his eldest son, William. Not Anne, not Camilla, William. The language was warm, personal, even protective. "You are the one I trust to carry my legacy," it read. Catherine's breath caught. This wasn't just preference, it was the king's explicit will. Holding the letter tightly, she left the library, her mind set on bringing it straight to William. But passing a narrow hallway near the communications office, she noticed a faint blue glow bleeding through a half-open door. Inside, the air was cool, the hum of electronics constant. No one was there. On the main desk, a computer monitor displayed a video file labeled Draft Speech June 28. Something in her chest tightened. She sat down and clicked. The footage filled the screen. Camilla, in her morning dress, positioned before the Union Jack, delivering a eulogy with perfect diction and calculated pauses. "Today, the United Kingdom bids farewell to a man whose reign defined our modern era," she began, her eyes glistening in a way that felt rehearsed. Halfway through, she broke character, smirked, and instructed the cameraman to reframe her so she appeared stronger, in charge. Catherine's stomach turned. This wasn't preparation. It was performance. Every take emphasized Camilla's own role, her leadership in guiding the family forward. Not a word about the king's current fight for life, not a hint of genuine grief. She fumbled for her phone, opening the screen recorder, and captured the entire file. Her fingers trembled as she pocketed the device, grabbing the letter from her other hand. By the time she reached her car, her pulse was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. At Sandringham, William was in his study, hunched over documents, exhaustion written into his face. Catherine entered quickly, shutting the door behind her. "You need to see this," she said, voice tight with urgency. She placed the letter on his desk, then handed him the phone. William read his father's words first, his eyes darkening with emotion. Then the video played. He watched silently, jaw tightening, lips pressed into a thin line. When it ended, he set the phone down with deliberate care. "She's already claiming the role," he said quietly, almost to himself. His voice hardened. "We end this tonight." That evening, the long dining table at Sandringham was laid with silver cutlery and candles, but the air was thick and unmoving. William, Catherine, Anne, and Camilla sat across from one another. The space between them charged. Conversation was minimal until William spoke, his voice like steel. "You filmed a funeral speech while my father is still alive." Camilla didn't flinch. She sipped her wine, then replied, "I was safeguarding the monarchy." Anne's hand slammed against the table. "You were safeguarding yourself." The flicker of the candles caught the fury in her eyes. The echo of Anne's words hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Camilla set her glass down slowly, her fingers tightening around the stem as though bracing for impact. William reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded the letter, placing it squarely on the table where the candlelight illuminated Charles's handwriting. "This," he said, his voice steady but lethal, "is my father's wish. His funeral, his final words, his legacy. Entrusted to me, not you, not anyone else." Camilla's eyes flicked over the paper, her expression unreadable. "You think a letter changes the fact that I am his wife," she said, the calm in her tone edged with defiance. "It changes everything," William shot back, "because this isn't about marriage, it's about loyalty, and you've shown none." Kate unlocked her phone and pressed play. The dining room filled with the sound of Camilla's recorded voice. Solemn lines about the king's passing, her eyes flicking toward the camera before that deliberate smirk, and the cold instruction, "Make sure the public knows who's in charge now." The words echoed against the walnut panels until even the candles seemed to stand still. Anne rose from her chair, pointing directly at Camilla. "You will not speak for my brother again, not while I breathe." Her voice cracked, but her glare was unshaken. For the first time, Camilla's composure faltered. She rose abruptly, the legs of her chair scraping against the floor. "You're twisting this," she said, her voice rising, the veneer of control thinning. "I was doing what had to be done." William's reply was swift. What had to be done was standing by him, not rehearsing his funeral while he still draws breath. Camilla's gaze darted from William to Kate to Anne, finding no ally in any of them. Without another word, she walked out, her heels clicking a final staccato rhythm down the marble hallway. The next afternoon, Buckingham Palace's Privy Council chamber was heavy with the scent of old wood and the quiet rustle of papers. William stood at the head of the long oval table, flanked by Anne and the kingdom's most senior advisors. The matter at hand was unprecedented, a resolution to strip the Queen Consort of any right to speak publicly on behalf of the royal family without the heir's approval. He laid the letter and the evidence on the table. "We will not risk the dignity of the crown for personal ambition," he said. "From this moment forward, no statement leaves these walls without my name or the council's consent." The vote passed with barely a whisper of dissent. By 4 o'clock, a sealed envelope was on its way to Sandringham, delivered directly to Camilla's private sitting room. She read it in silence, the weight of its words sinking in. Her title remained, but the power that came with it was gone. At Clarence House, the hum of medical machines filled the king's room. Charles's fingers twitched faintly against the crisp linen sheets. William sat beside him, the afternoon sun spilling in through parted curtains. Then a flicker, Charles's eyes opening, his gaze fixing on his son. His voice was faint, rasped, but clear enough to say, "Son." William's throat tightened. "I'm here, father." The news of the king's awakening spread quietly among the family before William announced it publicly that evening. His words, broadcast across Britain, carried warmth and certainty. The king was awake, recovering, and still very much theirs. That night, the family gathered for dinner in Sandringham's candlelit dining room. The head chair sat empty. No one mentioned it, but its absence spoke volumes. Kate raised her glass and said softly, "Trust, once lost, is never returned." Around the table, nods of agreement. In the quiet that followed, there was a sense that something had been restored, not by ceremony, but by loyalty that refused to bend.